am also the, oh, yay.
Shelly, I forgot about the recording.
Oh, I'm so glad you remembered. So this is Dawei Lin. He is with the NIH. I am Shelley Saul. I'm with the AGU. There you go. There's your short version of the intro. So I am the co-chair for the organizational assembly along with Michelle Barker, and we host the community of organizations that helps to support RDA, one of the groups. And we are very keen on helping that particular community see the different working groups that are being stood up and the different recommendations that are coming from the working groups in order to bring awareness and encourage adoption of these recommendations. The group also has their own motivations for being members of RDA and benefits from being part of the development of new work and encourages that to happen. So it is a very vibrant group. And we've been invited to support this plenary. And this BoF is one of those invitations to have a conversation that helps to span different ways and consider different ways of adoption. So Dawei has challenges within the NIH, has opportunities within the NIH we should probably mention, Dawei, that the NIH has announced, oh my gosh, it's been a year actually. It was October of 2020. They announced a new data sharing policy to be put into place in January of 2023. So just a little over a year yet, 2 years to go. 20, 22, 23, just a little over a year to go in order for full implementation of their data sharing policy. And as we all know, that brings questions and still problems to solve, because we are vibrantly working on, as a large community, vibrantly working on challenges. And one of the areas of concern that we as a large community, RDA and beyond, is how do we do collaborative work to implement policies that have such a broad impact. Some of you are working with the European Commission as well. They sadly were not available to be part of this session, but are very keen to hear our thinking. And we have a number of US funding communities that you've already heard from in plenary, from the US Geologic Survey. NOAA is working on open science, which includes sharing data, as well as NASA is working on open science, including sharing data. And then we have Australia as well, ARDC, and the work happening in OSCOPE, NCI, and CSIRO. Let's not forget everybody. And then Science Europe is also working on challenges. Welcome is. So we have a number of very interested funding agencies that are also trying to collaborate. Dawei, do you think I got the gist of that? And maybe it's a good time to move into the problem statements?
Yeah, no, I think it's a very nice overview. So the as Shelley mentioned, the idea of the session was motivated by the implementing the NIH data sharing, data management policy, but kind of evolve into a general interest. And I think that I admire, like, RDA produced so many good recommendations, and like myself and probably like nobody can understand them all and making meaningful connections. So I think Shelley has the similar experiences with the AGU. And so this session, really, we are sharing the frustrations, not about the content of the RDA output, and rather is how to maximize the value of those RDA output. I think that's the goal that we have. And then the problem that we identified together between Shelley and I is kind of put into the document already, but we really want to hear other people's the problems, and then we can think about how to develop strategies and what is the next step. So the problem we identified, like classified into 4 areas, and one is like there's too many out there. It's very diverse, complicated, and the scope and skill are still growing. So how do we manage that vast knowledge base? And do we need a equivalent of librarian that to manage those knowledge at the universities of other organizations? And then the second is that is often this implement something like policies have a lot of moving parts, and they have to work together. And then the solutions often coming from different working groups and interest groups. So how to put facilitate the collaborations of different groups, and I think that's another question. And the third question, actually, I was intrigued by when Shally mentioned it, is that there's a lot of recommendations is generated, have impact already, but then gradually there was not a lot of activity. It's kind of in the like freezing mode or in the waiting mode, and how do we activate that if we need it? How to find the support for that. And then the last but not least area is that there is a lot of boundaries that RDA has tried to overcome, including like the national libraries, domain-specific library, the national barriers, domain-specific barriers, and maybe like some in other international related to geopolitical barriers, and how to bridge those barriers to put this recommendation into a functional package to promote the value. I think that's sort of the overview of the area that we are thinking. And so then so that's basically what I think the problem areas we're currently thinking about.
So maybe let's have a very short conversation on the building blocks that are already in place at RDA. So Hillary's with us first of all, she has the historical knowledge of what's happened before. We don't want to go down a rabbit hole unnecessarily, so she'll help us stay out of that. But she's also been exposed to some of these more complex challenges and has already been thinking through a number of them. So we didn't want to, we wanted to build on what's been done, not go start from scratch and duplicate work. So that's having Hillary with us is really incredibly valuable. So Hillary, we have working groups, we have interest groups, we have a brand new community of practice. Do you mind spending a moment just sort of walking us through what those things are in a real quick high level, and then we can start to think about how to build on top of that, potentially.
Okay. Yeah, I will show slides, I know, that's by PowerPoint, but it might help to put it into context. So yes, a little sort of history lesson, I suppose, on well, not so much, but the communities of practice. I mean, when we started in RDA in 2013, there were only working groups at the first meeting, and then I don't know, I think there were 10 or 11 maybe were the first kicked off, and then but very quickly the need for interest groups arose, and they by, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the end of the first year of 2013, we started to see interest groups, and they have continued to be the good mechanisms, because there's a clear distinction between both of them. Working groups have that focus, there's a timeline, they deliver something, it goes through that sort of quasi-standard process, if you like, to get recommendations and stuff like that out. And then there's the interest groups, which are also have very important what we call supporting outputs, and move on, often spin out working groups, but they have a broader focus and things like that. And of course, the focus there can be more of a technological one, or a data challenge, or an infrastructure one, or a domain one, but not necessarily, it can be all or any of those. But I think it was, well, already in 2019, to be honest, I was approached, and we started discussing it at length, and then we set up a task force to help to create this communities of practice, which is now officially the third category of, if you like, work of the work of RDA. And that came from a specific need, if you like, to just like more or less what you have just discussed as the problem statements, if you like, Dawe and Shelley, to look at, you know, how can you, well, look inside what's available already in RDA for your specific area of interest, identify gaps or that your community perhaps has, and fill those gaps with what exists, or create, start to work on new aspects, as well as, if you like, bringing the players, stakeholders, closer together internally and externally. So not everything has to be done within RDA, that's not the point. But the point is that this is more, you know, it has more of a coordination. So they are larger groups and things like that. RDA, so we have a framework and a description, a document that describes them. I'll try and explain to you the difference, if you like, because a lot of times I get the question, so if we want to do a recommendation, or what happens? Yeah, so, well, the mechanism is actually the same as before, but we have them, as you can see, for some time. They've served as a window to the respective communities. And so the concept of this COP is based on the notion that a discipline or a domain area. So just to underline it, we decided in RDA, not that we don't feel there isn't a need for it for other areas, but we decided in RDA, given the fact that we want to see how difficult these are, or how, you know, cumbersome they may be to manage, both for the Secretariat and for the people involved and the chairs in that, to just focus on domain and discipline initially. So for the moment, that's sort of, if you like, the limitation around them. But nothing is to stop us not discussing directly for potential. I mean, I know there are other areas of interest. I've been approached for them. But basically, so the concept is around this discussion and, you know, the developments of solutions. Of course, the members learn about the trends in those areas, and they learn from individual experiences in challenges and collaboration, and how to best work with the existing outputs. And of course, there's an aspect of networking for, you know, and bringing more people into RDA, as long as that is, you know, feasible and facilitated by us. And then with the interaction and coordination, they expand their membership and whatever. So we did, just to show you where you find it, because you can never find anything on our website, but we do have under groups, there's now a section called creating or joining a community of practice. It gives all the details about it, including the framework. And then, of course, now that we have a community of practice, it does appear in the groups there on the left side. So if you click on communities of practice, on the right side, you will get the one community of practice that we have. So some people ask this, I have a couple of these examples. It's to try and explain how they work, yes, because people say, but okay, so if communities of practice, then they start working, producing recommendations and things. No, the mechanism of producing a recommendation is exactly the same as it always was. So this community of practice, if you like, can create its own, have its own suite, if you like, of working in interest groups. So let's use the agricultural data example, because they are the best. So they had the Wheat Data Interoperability Working Group. They have the interest group on agricultural data. There's the semantics, I think it was the Rice or Interoperability Working Group. All, of course, of interest to the agricultural data field. But so, you know, the working group may finish its role. The community of practice can help to maintain that output. The interest group can still go on with the work that it has. Or because you may decide that there's overlapping. So some groups create sort of subgroups. So you might want to talk about agricultural data citation or something like that. I'm not the expert. So you may link up with an interest group that already exists, but have it as if it were like a subgroup focusing on a specific domain. So you can see different variations when we worked through how this might look here on the images, or more than that. But the idea is to try and explain that the working in the interest group continue to be also a mechanism for producing outputs, but that the community of practice, if you like, encompasses it all. So there are different, as I said, variations on that. We have one, and I'm finishing up now, we have one interest group now. It was, well, IGAD, and IGAD is actually with us since the very beginning of the Research Data Alliance. They always organized as well. I mean, they already became a very big, strong collaborative group from the very beginning, and organized meetings, day-long meetings and workshops around our plenaries in different places around the world, and facilitate, you know, that they leveraged on RDA. It for them was a neutral space to work, so it was a good solution, if you like, and they in fact helped us to define the framework because we had their insights from, and now they are called, oh, and the image is hiding it, Improving Global Agricultural Data. So community of practice, so we don't lose the IGAD brand, which is well recognized in their within their community. So there's different information in those slides, and I'm happy to share them and link them with the thing. One thing I think is important, and Dawe and Shelley asked me to obviously highlight it, is this data together work that RDA, or collaboration that RDA has with CoData, with WDS and GoFair, and under different guises we work together. You know, International Data Week is one example with 3 of the 4 and things like that. So it's also not to be underestimated, that connection. And it doesn't always have to be through data together that you do things. That's, for us, it's more of a way of collaborating and pulling each other into activities to work together. But there are some very strong international players in CoData, in the Science Union and the World Data System and GoFair. So it's, I think, of advantage to everybody. And the idea is that we synchronize together on them. And there's one thing I don't have a slide on, I'm sorry, because I was a bit caught off the balance about it, and I couldn't find it. But there is one thing I'd like to throw into the discussion because it was mentioned. It's about the maintenance, yeah. And we have a call opening. So we have some funding in Europe. Now it will be a European supplier that will have to answer to the call because we can't give the money outside of Europe. But it is for them to design and define and implement a maintenance facility for RDA outputs and recommendations. And so that's important because we don't have that, and you raised it as a problem, which is true. So I see particularly for the communities of practice, or okay, so I see a solution, I see an output, and where do I go to now? Who am I going to go and get it to? So some, it's clear they're in maintenance and they will support it, but others not. And we need to be able to offer that where the community asks it for. So the timing of that, by the way, is we're delayed, unfortunately, with opening the call for a bureaucratic reason. We think that would be in place in June, maybe, or the work would start in June next year. So that, depending on the timing and the outcome of this birds of a feather, that might be interesting.
That would be very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. And so this is why the community is as rich as it is. There's all these opportunities, and very, very exciting. Dawi, do you have any comments?
No, I think it's very informative.
Yeah, and so I can talk a little bit. I'm watching to see if Cindy comes in, and if she doesn't, we can pick her back up in a moment. But for instance, one of the groups I'm a co-chair of is the Fair Data Maturity Model, and we benefited greatly from the European Commission supporting us with an editorial team. And this was incredibly valuable. We were able to move really quickly because they helped with coordination and setting up events, and helped us with writing and doing things that are time consuming, but not necessarily requiring decision making. And so that kind of thing is an incredible accelerator. And for volunteers that come together to work on issues, if you're looking for something to happen in a faster pace, that is a fantastic model to consider as a possibility.
Yeah, and you reminded me, if I may, Shelley, that actually, again, it's Europe. So there's funding from Europe, but it must stay in Europe, but it's for the benefit of global. There are two other things that actually I completely forgot about. One is domain ambassadors, which I think were useful, but they could be helpful also in supporting. So, linking, we had them in Europe, they were funded in Europe previously. So, linking, particularly for the domain specific, identifying someone who understands sort of the things and can look into RDA and see what's going on. But also exactly what you just stated there, support for communities of practice. And as RDA only has one at the moment, that funding would be focused at least on them. And the idea is that to maybe help pay for somebody that can ease the burden on the volunteers. And it comes exactly from the Fair Data Maturity Model group. And that's why we decided, now it's not huge money either, but I think we could look at 15 to 20,000 euro, depending on, for 3 to 6 months, perhaps a student or something could be identified who would just work on that. But again, the money has to stay within Europe. But I think if it can go to the benefit of the community of practice, which is global, it should be okay. So it's good to keep in mind that would be available next year too.
All right, that's really, really valuable. So let's so that's really the working group level in support of getting the recommendations out, maybe coordinating events at other kinds of levels. The idea that you had, I wrote it down in the notes, and I don't know who's typing, but thanks so much. Please keep typing. When you were talking about the agriculture community of practice as they were evolving over time, you said they had these co-located meetings with RDA, and I have had, for the work that I do at AGU, which I'll talk about in a little bit, I've definitely benefited from that. So I can certainly speak to it myself, but it's really interesting to understand how they leveraged who was coming to RDA to participate in those meetings. And Dawe, I'm thinking that I don't know if it would be valuable to do something specifically health oriented for what you're thinking about. But that might be something to start with. You could organize a co-located meeting. Certainly it's easy to do that virtually now. Is that something that you've considered doing?
Muted, Dawe.
Yes, I think it's very interesting idea, and I think definitely that can be considered, given there's a lot of interest from different directions in the data sharing policies from NIH, and also like although I should mention the NIH data sharing policies is for NIH, but is in impact globally.
Right. And it would be
1/3 of the medical research are kind of funded by NIH worldwide. So I think that can be a test case, even that, like to see how the community come together to focus on this one particular activity.
That would be interesting. So just so I have an interest here too. So within AGU, we have a GeoHealth section. So I have my not a whole foot in NIH, but I have a pinky toe over there for, compared to all of our other domains as well. But yeah, I would be really keen to see that. And I wonder, so that's a really substantial idea. We could invite, I don't know if I know the folks from the European Commission are going to watch this later, but we could reach out to their community in a meaningful way and see if they would be interested. We can certainly reach out to the folks in Australia to see if they would be interested, and to try something out. For the Earth and Space Sciences, we stood up an IG, and that has been primarily looking at the large projects, sharing initiatives. We have lightning talks on what's happening across the globe. We've been very keen on getting low and middle income countries engaged because we realize there's an equity issue. So there's I say equity, but I mean all of the imbalances, of engagement and involvement. So I'm not an expert, so I want to be cautious. I can't really speak to that as an expert, but that's part of it: awareness and learning, and being able to be inclusive in ways that are more meaningful and equitable. So we're all getting better. We're all learning, and we're all trying better.
Yeah,
but
I just want to mention, like, tomorrow also there is a Bird of Feather session focused on the biomedical data management, and in that session actually there is another topic is about culture change, and so maybe there's an element of that as well on top of the list that you provided, like, it's like, say, in the and, like, the policies really want to cultivate the culture change. So yeah, how to put the things together, I think, would be very interesting.
Well, I like that you've brought that up, because this is something that we at AGU have been really challenged with. Maybe this is a good segue for me to share a little bit of history on what we've been doing and talk about. Okay. Let's give Cynthia just a second. Cindy, thank you so much for joining us. I realize.
Happy to be here, and glad I could figure out how to get in relatively quickly.
So Cindy's our representative from the brand new community of practice. Cindy, I'm going to give you a second to take a breath, because I know you just hopped from another meeting and you have no idea what we just talked about. What I'll just say to you at the moment, because I'm gonna go off and share a presentation, is just if you could talk a little bit, just really briefly, about sort of the overview of how you came to a community of practice and how you see that benefiting your researchers, your engaged working groups and interest groups. So I'll just give you a second to get that thought in your head. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me make sure I have my slides ready to go here. Yep. So I'm going to give you all a little history on what AGU's been up to, and I'm very keen on the conversation here, because I think we, as a community, can benefit from some of these things that Dawi's been talking about, and also what Cindy, what Hillary has shared about the community of practice, and what Cindy is going to also share with us. Here we go. So some of you are aware of the Enabling Fair Data Project, and I'm going to talk more broadly about it, because many of you have actually helped with it. This was something that got started in 2018 and 19 were the years that it was most active. RDA was an incredibly important partner in this project, and I want to connect the dots for how we leveraged RDA. The American Geophysical Union, our position statement on data, is a couple pages, and the slides are attached so you can get access to the URL here. But I think the most important phrase that comes out of it that I like to use, and Chris and I use quite a lot, is that our data is a world heritage, and we need to care for it. We need to preserve it. We need to give credit to those who have created it. And so RDA is very important to us. And I also want to highlight, for those of you who are active within ESIP, the Earth Science Information Partners, we are really, that is a valuable community for us as well. In ESIP and RDA in conjunction are really important for the culture change that Dawi is mentioning. So what happened is we had well over 300 stakeholders, and since the funding for enabling fair data ended in 2019, the work, we technically kind of went into a maintenance mode, and the work continues, and we continue to have adoption, and we continue to work on the challenges through other efforts, which I'm happy to talk about if they're relevant here. And focusing on FAIR, but at the time, core trust seal mattered, and we would soon get trust from the work that Dawei and team were doing on building the trust principles. So they mattered as well, but they were not quite ready yet. But they are relevant to our future work. And now we have CARE, and CARE is relevant as well, but was not available to us at the time we were working on this, or wasn't our main focus. So we made stickers and talked a lot about FAIR, and I'll just keep moving. So FAIR relies on trusted repositories. So you see the connection into trust. And now our work is more moving into communities, meaning research communities, as well as connecting across internationally. Here's our project website. You're welcome to explore it. I'm going to keep moving. This is the objective we had. And at the bottom in the large print is really the focus, was to make sure that data are preserved in an appropriate trusted repository and cited in the paper. So the communities we were focused on were the scientific data repositories, as well as the publishers. So we were looking at those two. Now you can say to yourself, oh, Shelley, you left out a whole bunch. Yes, we did. We scoped it to be realistic, and now we continue to work across other communities for the culture change that Dawei's talking about. And you will also notice that we don't have researcher here. Chris and I are now heavily focused on connecting and providing researcher-specific content. And to be quite honest, I think many of you might have a comment on this. We have to do a lot of translation between how the informatics community talks and what researchers actually do. So we do an awful lot of translation to bring the content to them in a meaningful way. So I think that's something that we can keep in mind as well within science communication within RDA. So RDA has an incredible value. We were able to, we built, I believe in the project, nothing new was created. It was all adoption. And a number of the items were from RDA. We had some things from Force 11 and some things from ESIP. And there was a significant number of elements from RDA, including monitoring work that had yet to be completed. And what we really liked about the recommendations for RDA is that they did have the machine behind it of going through the RDA review process to become those cross-sector, politically neutral, community-specific implementation. So this was absolutely fantastic. And remember, this is in the time, so we have to go back in time. We had Lynn Yarmy. Lynn is doing very well, I understand right now. So we're, for those of you who remember Lynn, she was part of the US RDA and supported the RDA Secretariat. We were able to use some of the funds from enabling fair data to include Lynn as a part-time project manager. And really it was a community developer. So I give, with RDA's help and access to Lynn, we found the people we needed for the project to be successful. And I am not kidding. Lynn helped us connect to those working groups and those critical stakeholders within RDA to help us get the awareness of the recommendations that we needed to be successful. So we put her on our steering committee as well. And she really was instrumental in getting us connected. And then this was the transition from Mark Parsons to Hillary. And to Hillary's credit, she also helped us as well. But Mark was really critical as the previous Secretary General to help us connect into the community and highlight the work within enabling fair data. So thanks to Mark. And then Hillary was incredibly supportive as she took the reins of RDA. Mark was on our steering committee. And so we targeted very specific elements. Remember, it's publication and repository. So Scholix was critical. And one of the questions I asked at the time is, okay, we're gonna tell a whole bunch of publishers that they need to adopt Scholix. Who's going to help us? We need guidance to give to the publishers to do this. So this was a very active conversation at the time. Turns out it was much easier to actually do. We can still continue to evolve this. And then Core Trust Seal was also incredibly important. And we do have a Earth and Space Science cohort that Rebecca Koskela, who was part of Data One at the time and has now leads us on RDA US. She is our cohort leader. And we've had a number of Earth, Space, and Environmental Science repositories go through the certification process, and we still have open slots. So if you know anyone who wants to participate and become Core Trust Seal certified, that's still active. And maybe Rebecca will give you a link to that. I think we have something that she can use, or she has something. So I won't read these to you, but circa 2018-19, we were actively working with these working groups for outputs or their thinking or helping guide us in how we were going to do certain things or what gaps still remained. These were the interest groups we were very closely monitoring. The very first one here, data policy standardization implementation, we just gave a talk in the organizational assembly on how AGU has adopted the recommendations that came out. And these folks were targeting publishers and now working on funders. I think this is really relevant work for Dawei, what you're up to. I'm going to quick check time because I don't want to go over too much. For legal interoperability, also incredibly important within our ongoing work at AGU. We're working very closely with SHARC. Chris Erdman is a co-chair of the library's research data. I'm a co-chair of the ESIP, RDA, Earth, Space, and Environmental Science IG, and Kirsten Leonard, who was our previous steering committee member for Enabling Fair Data, helps co-chair the physical samples, I believe, or has, I have to go check, but she is or was involved in that as well. So really keen on the connections to RDA. And then as things have moved on, these were other connections. The RDA NISO group, we are now very active in RDA. The Fair Data Maturity Model has been very engaged with the Indigenous Data Sovereignty IG. That's really important work coming out of CARE and onward. So this is the slide, and Rebecca, I don't know if this is the most current information, but this is the slide that I've used in the past on our cohort. And then these are just links, convenient links for going forward. But we continue to have culture change at AGU, and what Dawei's talking about is really important for coordinating what the expectation is by the major stakeholders broadly. And it would be really interesting to consider what that would mean at using RDA as a platform to help culture change move forward. Taking a breath.
Yeah, Shelley, thanks for sharing the experience at AGU. I think that is demonstrated, like there is a lot of thinking, a lot of coordination need to work. So I think the idea is that, you know, can the effort that you have already put out there, and maybe you and other colleagues have put out there, can be replicated in the other areas, and I think that's probably the goal of this discussion. That, you know, like probably we'll kind of do like very similar thing, although the subject is different, but maybe the community work is similar. So yeah, if that lesson learned can be leveraged.
So, and to get another opinion, Cindy, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay. And thank you, and apologies to you because we did ask you last minute to do this. So thank you very much for being here with us. Do you have anything slides, or do you just want to talk?
I do have slides because I wasn't listening to you while you were talking. I was putting together some slides.
Well, you know what I talk about, so that's okay.
I know your story, and actually that is also a caveat I should say at the beginning, because I know I recognize, half the names of the people who are here, and some of you have probably seen some of these slides 4 times already. So I apologize in advance for those of you who see me talk about this before in other venues, including last week in our session at RDA. So for some of you, it won't be that new, but definitely I see some names I've never seen before. So hopefully I'll provide enough background to make it understandable what's going on. And let me share my slides.
I'm going to make you a co-host in case that's necessary. So I just gave that to you. So yeah.
Okay. Looks
just
like I can share.
There we go.
Unfortunately, now I lost everybody. So
I can still see them. They're here. So, and we can see you. So.
Yeah. No, I got them back.
Okay.
So I guess the other thing I will say, number one, you're a hard act to follow, Shelley. You basically, with that said, I guess I will say I won't feel too bad because we're really just at the beginning of this community of practice effort. So I don't have results yet, and I can't tell you exactly how it's all going to work. I can just tell you where we are.
It's the how you get there. Yes,
right.
That's success.
And I also expect that this should be a little interactive because I don't know what you want to know from me. So I will just start talking, but I would love to be interrupted with questions. And then the other caveat, which you can see on this slide, is I am one of 3 co-chairs, and we did this as a group. And I don't necessarily know all the answers myself because we really did share the burden of the process. And so even though I was involved in a lot of it, I may not have focused on the parts that you're interested in. So
let me stop you here. So you represent a government funding agency in the US that's relevant. And then I don't know what MBRAPA is, but I see the UN here.
Right. So this this group of co-chairs was specifically chosen to be geographically diverse. So we it more or less started, I think, more with FAO in the beginning, and then we roped in somebody from Brazil, and then I had been attending, and I decided it was silly for USDA not to be involved, just because we really have to be able to be a leader here. So so Emma Subaratz is the one who's been most involved for longest. I'm of this list, I'm second in terms of having been involved. And then Deborah Drucker just started with us from MBRAPA. MBRAPA is, I like to think of them as very similar to the part of USDA that I represent, which is actually not so much a funder. I am within the Agricultural Research Service, which is our intramural research group, but I also work a lot with our extramural research agency, NIFA, and a bunch of other research parts of USDA. So, USDA is huge, just like FAO is huge. And I'm not sure how big MBRAPA is, but the nice thing about our co-chairs is that we can actually get together for regular meetings. We're in time zones that are close enough, but we do represent 3 different continents, and we have different networks, and we can try to do what we can in our own parts of the world to get things done. So that, I think, has helped us. And then I'm just going to switch to the next slide if I can do that. Just to show you, if you can look down at the bottom, apparently the first interest group meeting for agricultural data was held in the second RDA plenary. So EGAD as a group has been around since 2013. So very, very early days of RDA. I was not involved back then. But starting, let's see, I'm not sure when they started. At some point, they started to have pre-meetings. So instead of expecting everything to happen during the main RDA plenary, they started organizing a full day or sometimes 2 days of sessions before or after RDA, so that everybody who wanted to talk could talk, and it could be essentially a mini symposium. And so we took advantage of the convening power that RDA had, but many of the people that would come to those pre-meetings did not actually attend the full RDA because they couldn't afford it. And so that's also been a theme through this, is that especially through the work of FAO, there's a big focus on trying to engage people from the global south who cannot necessarily afford to go to a big meeting, but could attend a small meeting with almost, I mean, we didn't really charge any organizing fees for our plenaries, maybe a little bit for food, but so we're trying to balance, you know, bringing people together, introducing them to RDA, allowing for venues for people to share what they have been working on and to learn about what's happening at RDA. And so essentially the message is we were already a community of practice, actually. So as an interest group, we were EGAD, the interest group on agricultural data, but then as we got bigger and bigger and realized that RDA had the potential to more formally recognize the nature of our group, I think we got into discussions with Hillary and other leadership in RDA that, you know, maybe this is a different category of group. And part of it had to do with how diverse we were and how large we were, but also what we were doing. We basically were primarily a networking venue and an exchange of ideas venue. And we organized webinar series, we organized some training through some of the work groups. We didn't actually hold ourselves accountable for the working groups that we were promoting, but we were essentially an incubator and a place where people could come back and report.
Can you talk more about the training?
Oh, that's probably, that's one of those areas that I don't know much about. So we had a capacity development working group, which did some work with GODAN, the Global Agricultural Data Global, what does GODAN stand for? Yeah.
Global
and
network.
so, yeah. So anyway, they put together a lot of training and held trainings, especially I think in Botswana. But again, that's not a part that I know a lot about. So,
but that's also something that's a little different than what we generally focus on. Okay, carry on. I'm sorry. That's really good. That's good.
Yeah. So I think, again, part of this, a lot of this is driven by the FAO and their mission to make sure that all parts of the world have access to the information that they need to do good work in agriculture. So
I'm sorry. I am really excited that you're speaking.
Please do. Yeah.
So money, did anyone actually help fund anything? Like, did the UN?
Again, I'm the wrong person to ask, because so essentially the UN, I think, has put in a lot of in-kind support. So a lot of the people that work with Emma have done work like helping to communicate through the FAO channels, helping to run webinars. So essentially they've provided a lot of in-kind support. I think the capacity development working group and GODAN had funding to do work that it was doing, but we helped provide I think we helped provide more of the community oriented, you know, assistance to do that.
Expertise and such.
Yeah, so I think we were successful in getting funding to support travel throughout some of this. So again, I'm a federal employee. I can't take this kind of money. And so I wasn't involved, and I can't even touch that part of it. So wasn't involved in that funding, but we did get support to essentially to provide travel grants to people to join us at meetings. And so there was some small amounts of money, not large, but intended to support the community.
This is Dawei. I think if you could, I am curious that like in terms of the implementation, something like implementation for something like the data sharing policy of NIH. When I'm thinking that, like, say, for example, RDA, you have the working group working on the data management plans, and maybe like make the data management plan computable, and then maybe there is the FAIR implementation group of different
Mhm.
kinds, and maybe, you know, the repositories. So all these pieces need to be put together, and then probably like will the people who want to implement all these elements will put down some resources. So what kind of discussions that the community of practice group are talk about, and then, you know, what are the challenges that you guys have, and how do you make progress?
So first, I should be very clear. We just became a community of practice, like literally last week or the week before. So,
Okay.
so we have not officially been a community of practice for very long. And so, and we also, in the process of submitting all of our materials to RDA, we had challenges coming up with our roadmap because we hadn't gone to our community to say, how should we go about doing this? We had, as organizers, as co-chairs, we had our thoughts on how we wanted to do things, but we basically, in our session this time, talked through what some of the options we wanted to do were, and did some surveys to find out what challenges people had that they thought we should work on. We didn't have a huge attendance at the session this year, so I don't know that that what we came up with will really guide our roadmap. We need to reach out to our community more to do that. So we probably will expand that surveying. But I can tell you that before we officially were a community of practice, one example of an activity we did was in our Berlin meeting in 2018, we had essentially a whole theme of FAIR data. And so we brought in speakers to talk about FAIR data with representatives from around the world, people who wouldn't necessarily know as much about it because they hadn't been involved in RDA so deeply. So while we were not ourselves supporting the implementation in those respective parts of the world, we were at least bringing everybody up to speed on what it would take and talking about what those challenges could be. And in that meeting, another example of challenge that came up from the community was about farmers' data rights, and the fact that people who do research with farmers often are challenged because even though we have these mandates to make data public, if it's data from farms that's relatively sensitive, they don't necessarily want their data to be public, and they need to be protected in some way. So how do you do that? How do you resolve? So we've had a number of subsequent meetings and discussions about codes of conduct and how to sort of navigate that fine line between wanting to get as much value from the data as you can, but also protect the rights of the private citizens or companies that where the data is coming from. So those are just a couple of examples. And so we're really just getting started. We'll see in more concrete detail where the community wants to go with this, but I'm going to show this slide just as a sense of how we think this is going to work. And so we essentially see the community of practice as the hub that is situated within the Research Data Alliance, but which brings together representatives from a bunch of networks that are much larger than we are, actually. Each one of those networks that you see around that hub is, in most cases, hundreds and hundreds, if not more, people, not all of whom are ever going to go to an RDA meeting, but some of them will. And so the idea is that we can use this hub to get ideas. Well, so here's this next slide. You can see around the hub are the working groups and interest groups of RDA. And so we can use the community of practice to essentially facilitate information transfer in and out of RDA. So we'll have liaisons who we've already identified and who help support the community of practice proposal, who will attend our meetings, our RDA meetings. And the idea is that they will bring with them information from their communities that may be useful for RDA to consider in terms of use cases for working groups, and real concrete ideas about what people out there in the field really need. And then similarly, they can take the ideas from these working groups, the practices, the recommendations, the outputs of the interest groups and working groups, and take them out to their communities to actually implement in those communities. And so we're seeing our role primarily as facilitation and bringing the right people together, and maybe with our roadmap, putting some goals together to really facilitate this. And that includes things like outreach and training and convening, both during RDA and outside of RDA. So we'll, to some extent, we'll keep doing what we're doing, but we'll be a lot more intentional about it. And we'll be thinking to make sure that we're filling the gaps and we have the right groups involved. So let me go back to this slide. You can see that these are just the start of the networks. We're starting to find out, okay, what are the regional networks that we don't know about yet that we need to include in this process? And then maybe even what are the more disciplinary networks that we should be engaging with? So precision ag is one of these, the geospatial consortium clearly is, but the agricultural space is very diverse, and it's everything from nutrition to hydrology to economics to soils. So there are a lot of different sub-communities within ag that overlap with those RDA disciplinary communities that themselves may be ones that we should engage with. So let me just sort of end with our discussion with our, well, some of the goals are to essentially provide regional input and use cases for the standards and initiatives that are coming up in RDA. Make sure that we can protect farmer and other data rights, make sure we link with these other domains, and basically increase global awareness of some of the concepts that are so important to RDA. And then more specifically, who should we be engaging with, intentionally trying to find those networks that we haven't yet engaged with, develop a communication plan and some outreach materials so that we can intentionally maybe even act as a concierge service. So as new people come to RDA, we can help them find which interest groups, which working groups they should be involved in. I mean, Hillary knows the numbers better than I do, but it's very complex and it's hard for somebody who's new to figure out where they should go. And so we want to provide a more personal touch for that, since we have within our membership people who should be engaged in at least some of this. And that's basically where we are. So we don't really have a super concrete roadmap, except
Oh, it's a pretty good roadmap. So, especially for culture change. And Cindy, I don't know if you realize you're frozen yet. Oh, there you are. Okay. So your last couple sentences got lost in the depths of the digital world.
Sorry about that. Yeah, it looks like my internet connection is unstable. Let me turn off my.
So what you said was that you don't have a super clear roadmap, but we're disagreeing with you that you actually have an amazing roadmap. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have some ideas, and I was saying that we need to add we're planning to add a fourth co-chair, just because we're now meeting every week and there's a lot of pieces in motion, and we need some strong leadership at the top, but then we also need to promote leadership within the membership so that when one of us needs to drop out, which is just going to happen, that we have somebody.
Oh no, that they have somebody. Okay. All right. Tawe, that is a real impressive example.
Yeah, I agree. I think and she also touched upon a couple problems we mentioned earlier, right? Like like concierge surveys to help people familiar with the working groups and landscapes, and probably like relate to a particular domain. And
I'm back. Yeah. Just so you know, I got dropped, but I'm back.
So, and to that point, Dawe, when Hillary was talking and showing the slide about how it's conceived, I guess, and then she pops her video on, thanks, Hillary, and how the different communities of practice could potentially be conceived. One of the questions that was in my mind was, oh, it looks like some of the working groups or interest groups could actually sit in different communities of practice potentially. And then Cindy had the example of the Indigenous knowledge group, and I thought, oh man, we know they need to be everywhere. Those folks, by the way, are doing their very best to be everywhere. We have to give them some huge credit on the amount of work they're putting out right now. But yeah, I think that's really keen. Like there's only one data citation working group, which is now ended, I believe. I don't think they went into maintenance mode, but they've ended. And this is a really interesting way to then build on that work. Like, how does that apply within agriculture? How do citations apply within health? How do citations, like for instance, in the Earth, Space, and Environmental Science IG, we're going to stand up a complex data citation working group. We're going to try to anyway. We're going to give it a go to see, because we have a particular use case, which, by the way, isn't just in our space, but it's something we want to spend time fixing and invite others to help us. And then how do we do that? Yeah. The other thing that's really thank you. The other thing that's really interesting, Cindy, is that you are meeting weekly. And
yeah,
so,
and it's not every week. I mean, we have a standing meeting. Sometimes it gets canceled, but we just discovered there was so much happening that we had to make time to plan it all. And part of that's because of 2 plenaries, but other things like the proposal that Hillary knows that we were participating and being part of, and we do hope to get some funding to help with some of this coordination. And you know, we've published a paper, we ran a webinar series, so there was a lot happening, and so we realized we needed a weekly touch point.
Great. I wonder, Dawig, if I can go ahead and play the video from Leslie, because I think that gives us a very different look on how to coordinate. So let me do it. She doesn't do a huge introduction of herself, but Leslie Wyborn is associated with the Australian National University. She's incredibly active at RDA. I think everyone here likely knows her, but the context for this video is she has been really keen on vocabularies. Many of you are aware that when it comes to implementing FAIR, vocabularies is one of the areas that we're very challenged in. There's especially in the earth, space, and environmental sciences, we have a number of them. There is not really governance around it, and she's been working on how to think about this. We're partnered with her on another grant at AGU, an international grant, and we've been hosting some vocabulary sessions when it comes to how the researchers should look at vocabulary. And Hillary, Leslie has been, I'm looking at your picture, it's right next to mine, that's why I said your name, I'm sorry, that's weird. Leslie has been working on how to think about what does a maturity of a vocabulary look like, with challenges about management and ongoing maintenance as well. And she's teamed with Simon Hodson at CoData to think of, to put in for a working group concept where they can get to the researchers through the unions. So I hope that's enough of an intro for this. I'm going to share my screen. If this doesn't work, I will move over to a different browser. Every once in a while when I share my screen to share video, I run into some audio problems, so cross your fingers. Here we go.
Welcome to this short presentation on the International Science Council CoData Decadal Program for Vocabularies and Standards Working Groups, which aim to engage both domain and technical efforts. This is a presentation by Simon Hodson and myself, Leslie Wyborn from ANU. So CoData has this decadal plan about making data work for cross-domain challenges. Big challenges such as the Sendai Disaster Framework, Future Earth, the Sustainable Development Goals, and disaster risk reduction programs. In this ISC action plan, it entrusts CoData with this initiative to establish a global decadal plan to address these issues. The major pressing global scientific and human research issues of the 21st century can only be addressed through data-intensive research that works across domains to understand complex systems. The digital and data revolution presents us with huge opportunities, but significant challenges. There are major challenges for many scientific domains that requires so much work on data specifications, semantics, and infrastructures. And until we do, 80% of effort is wasted on data wrangling and conservatively estimated to be a cost of 10.2 billion euros in opportunity costs from suboptimal data stewardship. Addressing how to access and combine data needs input from both domain and technical experts. In particular, we need technical frameworks for seamless cross-domain programmatic data access, which is where the technical people come in, but we need definitions agreed to by the communities. That is, we need the domain expertise. Therefore, the Making Data Work program design is in three parts. Firstly, we are making data work for the technical issues and building the consensus activities for interoperability. Part 2 is mobilizing domains and breaking down silos. And part 3 is advancing interoperability through cross-domain case studies as part of those challenge programs I mentioned in the previous slide. So we've already started within CoData, and we're looking at fair vocabularies in domain and cross-domain research fields. How do we make it work? And the initial group came from the International Study for the Science of Population and a CoData working group on fair vocabularies. And they are working with some owners of some key scientific vocabularies and applying the 10 simple rules for making a vocabulary fair and other good practices. The second use case, which is coming up, is that the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry already has a program called Digital Chemistry, but now they want to work with CoData to get that technical expertise into what they're doing at the domain level. A new one on the block is Geochemistry, where we're trying to get agreed standards for global geochemical data exchange. And that is really complex. Whereas these are one-on-one between CoData and a science union, we think that geochemistry covers at least 5 unions, and I've lost track of how many potential societies, but we think it's manageable. But there's also a suggestion we can do something to make environmental science fair vocabularies. But don't ask me where to start in identifying which groups we need to engage at the domain level. And so what we're proposing is to get this decadal program to work, we need to invite collaborations with other scientific unions or similar discipline representative bodies and form a set of working groups exploring vocabularies and other semantic artifacts to make them fair. So how will it work, you ask? And so I come back to those 3 program elements: making data work. So we take this technical work that's been done, 10 simple rules for making a vocabulary fair. Then we mobilize the domains and silos. So I've got the ones we talked about: IUSSP, IUPAC, Geochemistry, Environment, and I don't know how many others. And we coordinate through a CoData ISC convened forum to support the working groups. But above all, we work with these major Grand Challenge programs to identify case studies and advance interoperability through cross-domain case studies. Thank you for your attention.
So a very different approach, and more like the data together that Hilary was talking about earlier, with leveraging the unions. I know Ian is still here. Ian is part of the IUPAC effort they have done an enormous amount of work within that standards body to define what fair means, to take a look at the Gold Book and get that online. That's some of the work that Leslie was talking about. And that's been incredible, but it's also years in the making. With not a lot of funding and co-locating with the IUPAC meetings, and also collaborating with ASC, the American Chemical Society, Chemical Society. Oh my gosh, we're being recorded. I'm gonna get in trouble. And you know, yet another group to work together. So it's rich. It's a rich opportunity. You know, this path that Leslie's taking is a little different. She's fairly certain the unions are really critical here, so that's why she went that direction. But we've also seen true success happening here at RDA. So I think what Cindy's described as a community of practice, which we really do need ongoing. I think that's a critical element here, that we're not going to solve it. It doesn't, you don't have a conversation and you're done. You have an ongoing commitment to improving and building in what we're all working towards. And this is long time. This is long-term work. This is not a working group that stands up, gets established. You know, what she was talking about with the decadal working groups, you know, you might be able to actually do what she's trying to do with the co-data working group. But for what we're looking at a domain level, this is ongoing iterative improvement over years and decades. So I think that's one of the reasons RDA is such a great home for that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I think it's just add on to that. I feel as I understood it, is that I think Leslie's first two elements is the activities seems like align with the RDA very well, like, you know, build the consensus and then breaking down silos and let people working together.
Yeah.
But I think the third piece is very intriguing, is that also need some driving force to actively implement it. Like, you know, we'll definitely use whatever the products coming out of the community and constantly apply that to some real use. And hopefully that will be a driving force to kind of grow the community, also like have a two-way street, like, you know, in and out, give input to the working group or interest group, and also kind of promote what is generated from those groups. So I think like the third element, I feel we haven't really touched on in the early discussions.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Cindy did have that one diagram where she was showing that concept of liaisons. And I love that. Like, so for a community of practice, having those liaisons identify people who have a foot on both sides, and they can help represent at least one path, because it's a lot of thinking and a lot of work. So that's really interesting. Ian, are you ready to share what's happening at IUPAC? Did I give you enough time to think about it?
All right? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Excellent, thanks. First thing I'm going to say is a plug, because we've got a chemistry research data interest group session tomorrow. And I think one of the reflections there is we've got about 7 or so talks in that are pulling to what you'll be hearing from different initiatives that are all working towards the idea of fairer chemistry data and chemistry data standards. So although there has been a lot of work in IUPAC, there's now increasing amounts of work going on in other venues. I think one initiative to note is NFDI in Germany, which is investing in a whole load of domains, and the NFDI for Chem project is really keen to sort of develop minimal metadata standards. So sort of reflecting this back onto RDA, maybe certainly when we set up that interest group, I think the idea evolved into sort of like a bridging mechanism to sort of try and bridge between what RDA was doing and what the wider chemistry community is. I think tomorrow is going to be a great opportunity for people within the chemistry community to come together and share what they're talking about. I think the opportunity there is to seriously, and it's something we always intended to do and probably haven't got around to, look at what RDA outputs are coming out and make sure these are being channeled into the discussions that are taking place elsewhere. I'll give a little example of this actually, which was a colleague of mine, or someone working in this area, was at another meeting where people were talking about fair publishing workflows. I get an email, isn't Scholix going to help with this? Yes, Scholix is going to help with this. And it's a little bit scary that conversations are going on which risk reinventing wheels. So I think there's real opportunity there for the RDA to try and kind of avoid that happening and make sure channels of communication are flowing. I'll pause there. I've probably got a few other thoughts, but I don't know if that prompts other thoughts from other people.
Yeah. So this is really exciting. So Ian, I need to connect with you on the NFDI thing, because Chris and I for 2022 are launching, and we've not really said this publicly except one group, and I'm a little nervous because we don't have all our ducks yet, but I'll go here because you all are trusted, right? But we're going to start to work on the elements needed for a data management plan by domain and subdomain associated with AGU's community, and try to, of course, this has to be co-developed and co-designed. AGU can't do that for their community, but we want to give them the platform and the encouragement to do this so that we can finally get an answer to the very challenging domain-specific standard question, like where are they and how can we point to them? So that would go towards what are the preferred repositories for this type of data? What is the type of metadata? What are the maybe the methods for cleaning, for aligning, for normalization, for aggregation, whatever the basic stuff is that anyone working in that domain should use commonly. And not, please don't think about it. Please just use what your community expects you to use. And then that evolves. And then that has to be managed over time. What vocabularies, for instance, what this thing that Leslie's working on, what are the vocabularies for that domain? So that no one has to guess and there can be support behind it. So yeah, Ari, yes, please.
Yeah, I wasn't certain that do you want audience participation or not, because there's been a lot of presentations. Yeah, but it's sometimes difficult to come in the between. So actually, I wanted to go back to really in the very beginning. I think, Dave, you mentioned about these challenges about finding RDA products for the certain purposes. And of course, Cynthia presented very good example of this kind of activity. But I was actually thinking more in the general in RDA, could it be good to think about different roles people have and different kind of organizations, not only disciplinary. I'm thinking now, for example, in my own university, University of Helsinki, there are other people of University of Helsinki already in this session as well. But in general, if you think about other research universities, there's thousands and thousands of them, and they have thousands and thousands of librarians. So we could think about creating this kind of, it's not really a technology stack. There is some tech aspects of it, but also technology and policy stack of RDA for different kind of organizations and different kind of roles people have in their organizations. And some of them can be disciplinary, like the example shown here, but I just wanted to little bit widen that one, because it feels sometimes in this context that you are working with the people who are already working with these things. Like you are preaching to the choir, how do you pronounce it? In some sense that they are the people who have the time to do this. And really to get these things, let's say, more implemented widely would be an idea to think about really looking at different viewpoints and trying to see what we have there. And also that could also help to a little bit guide future activities, thinking what we don't have there. But that requires then some discussion. For example, in my case, it would mean to talk to small universities, and not only their libraries, but also to their computer systems and so on, and to see what they can do and what could they use actually. They might not know what they could use, but if we would have these packages, I think that could be one way to proceed. I don't know if these communities of practice are the way to create them, but maybe, I don't know.
Hillary, you look like you're about to say something.
Well, no, but you know, I mean, I think Rebecca can also say it. It's a constant request that you get, and I think it's come under different guises, you know, in this meeting, but in others as well. And we know that one of the challenges is giving more visibility and understanding to the outputs. But then there are many of them, and how. So yeah, I would see the community of practice in some way as doing that, though it's possibly also unfair to expect that. But maybe some examples. I mean, there's also lots of work over the years was done by the Technical Advisory Board to try and provide a mapping of RDA outputs. And for one reason or another, they were never really sort of taken to the end, to the finish line. So I don't have a solution, but I am fully aware that it is something that we need to do. And on the chairs meeting recently, it was also discussed. And but it's, as Ari also said, it's always the same people as well who you know, raise the question. And I suppose that the onus is on them to do something about it, and that's not fair. But on the other hand, I don't have the manpower or the expertise in the secretariat or in the organization at this moment in time to do it. So that's always a challenge.
Yeah, I wasn't actually suggesting that you would do it, but I was actually thinking about future potential. If we are thinking of something which should be maybe funded from outside, we could think about this way, because it would create a lot more engagement probably for a lot of the services. And the other thing, which I think might be the reason why it hasn't taken off that much, is that before we didn't have that many outputs. And now when the number of outputs is expanding, you are starting to get this kind of, let's not say full stack yet, but close to full stack, meaning that then you can really come to the whatever small research university and give them the whole package of things and say that these are the things what we think you should do. And maybe go that way.
Yeah, Chris, go ahead.
It's coming on screen. And that's not the COVID virus and behind me. People seem to be commenting. Yeah, I work with Shelley, and it's just a quick question, and it has to do with sort of the technology stack, you know, the services that RDA is using, and could help with sort of like this other question, I think, of understanding what other groups are doing, and you know, basically ensuring that teams are on this, you know, like informed, and our groups are informed, and you know, like there are certain tool stacks or tools that we've discussed with relation to the website, and I just wondered where we are at there.
I know that it's that's the upcoming funds for next year to replace the RDA website, right?
Yeah, if you know anyone who's interested in developing for us, the call is open. You have to find.
Oh, it's open? Oh, okay. I didn't know.
Yeah, the call is open. Deadline is soon, but if we have to, we'll extend it. We've had a couple of expressions of interest so far, but yeah, we're looking for someone to develop it for us. Yeah.
Yeah. Ian, you have a thought?
Yes. So I think Hillary mentioned funding, and I think there's becoming an important need for funding to support people to join the dots. And I don't think this falls on RDA. I think, you know, reflecting on the chemistry experience, again, lots of different things are happening in lots of different places. And the one I didn't mention was industry. Industry has taken hold in sort of the life sciences area, has taken hold of the FAIR principles, and they're applying them. And part of that means they're going to be developing standards as well. And bridging all these initiatives in an effective way so that you end up with standards and solutions that can be universally adopted is going to take effort. So I guess RDA can be that coming together maybe to put together the case for going out to other places and getting the funding. And Leslie's mentioned some of the things that are being done with co-data there to sort of pull communities together to do that. I think that's going to become increasingly important. IUPAC itself doesn't have the funding to keep on top of these things. It has a slimmed down secretariat, probably less than you actually, Hilary, trying to keep on top of all these things. And this digital challenge and opportunity is, stretches its capabilities. So it's finding the funding that enables this, not necessarily does the work, that enables that sort of overall coordination, which I think is becoming increasingly important.
That's actually, that's what the European funders are doing. So they're actually providing the funding in Europe, for Europe, but to help with global, which in one way doesn't solve, the central global problem, but it does offer, if you like, ideas. And it's part of that financial sustainability piece we were presenting earlier today, which the idea is that kind of ad hoc funding and how can we support, because I fully agree with you, the work of RDA, there must be a way for it to be funded, and it doesn't necessarily need to come centrally to us, but there's a great benefit from that, of that connecting the dots thing. But it is useful to have an understanding of it when you do go to speak to the funders and say, well, we need this, a business as usual, but we'll also need this, and if you pay for that, you will get this, and that obviously they'll see a better impact. I know that from trying to do it. So, but it's worth bearing in mind and seeing how can we create that package. And every time it'll be different, but there might be some sort of small toolkit that could be generated.
No, that's one of the, Chris and I are both blessed to be paid by AGU to participate full-time across our community and other communities. And one of the things that is incredibly common is just the questions like, I won't name any particular domain because I don't, certainly my viewpoint doesn't represent an entire domain's viewpoint. So I don't want you to think that I'll just say it just sort of neutrally, but folks that are interested in getting started just need to know what the first book is, or what do I read first? And so we'll load them up with, okay, well, do you come from a community that is publishing? All right, here's what you need to know about citations and PIDs and linking and credit. And these are all really important because publishing is a leverage point. Do you come from a community that's very domain specific? Okay, then the value statements are different because you need to get to why does a researcher care? Why do you want them to be involved? And you need to tune the message very differently. Do you come from a library, institutional repository community? Okay, then you talk about it differently. Here are the resources that you need to use that, to talk to your community. And here are here are the people that have already come ahead of you. And you do have to tune that message. And, of course, our favorite community, hello, funders. But funders, we really need to think about them as needing our help very uniquely. They are very cautious about not telling their community what to do. They will lag because they won't say the community standard is. They need us to hand them a community standard that we have endorsed, and so that they can point to it and say, this is what we need. And, it's not them saying it, it's them pointing to the community. So such that the community norms around data and software sharing are defined already. And they say, okay, we'll use those norms. So DAWI's in that situation right now. They have very boldly put forward data sharing knowing that some community standards exist, but not all of them, and how do they fill in the back, not necessarily defining those standards, but adopting those standards. So it's a very delicate, it's almost like we have to have an agreement on what our roles are. You know, the funders have a role, the community has a role, we have to work together. Anyway, having this conversation is so exciting because it means we all get our role, and we have to deliver.
Right. No, I think Charlie, you really summarized the challenges well, and I think the question is that what is the next step? Like, you know, what is the mechanism that within RDA, if the RDA is a venue going to bring the people together to tackle those challenges?
I think I would point straight to Cindy's work. And Cindy, of course, I understand that you couldn't possibly represent the entire work of the new COP, but what Cindy represented with the new COP, I think is really something that we should see as our culture change vehicle. For AGU, we have done a lot of our work at the high umbrella level. We've, you know, you shall cite your data. You shall cite your data. And we've moved the ball pretty far, but there are some very strong, well-built walls that we're hitting because, frankly, it's not easy to cite your data. It's not. When it's not easy to have provenance, it's not easy to pull the 5 different data sets where there's not a DOI on each of them. The data granularity working group I am cheering for, because if they can help us understand ways of assigning persistent identifiers, targeting subgroups, looking at larger groups, and give us guidance, they are really critical for how we need to move forward. And then we have a new working group that we're standing up I told you about the complex data citations. And these are when you're trying to cite 100 data sets and your journal won't take it because they're just really uncomfortable with that. And getting journals to change practices, you might as well watch paint dry. That's just not something they're able to do. We need to give them tools that allow them to make things work within these legacy systems that we're stuck with. And I know many of you are part of the open science movement, and you know it's just very complicated. So we're working on these concepts around collection DOIs and what does it mean to cite both data and software and images and video, and have everybody who contributed get credit. So citing data is actually really complex. And how do you do that? So we're working on it, but there's not an answer today. Okay, so next steps forward. I think that's what you're trying to get to, don't we?
Yeah.
I think the community of practice, looking at health, looking at bioinformatics, is a way that NIH can go forward. I think it's something that the Earth and Space Sciences can also take a look at, although we do have our IG. And, you know, I see Cindy had the OGC, which, you know, we claim as well. And that would be really interesting to see how we're connected there. We have Geo, which is an international community. And then you saw Leslie's group with environmental sciences. So the IUGG, the IUGS, and I love the connection to the UN. For us, I think it's the IGCP, if I got that acronym right. Thanks, Cindy. Okay, thank you so much. I'm glad you could be here. I think we need to look at global collaboration using RDA as a platform to connect the dots and set those culture change goals, and realize this does take some funding to do well. It takes coordination to do well, but we can do what we can with what we have.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
So So what do you think, like, if we want to continue the discussions, what is the approach you think that we should do it? Like,
thanks, Tanya. Everybody's. What is the approach? Well, I think there are multiple approaches. I think the mechanism for a community of practice is really rich. Dawi, when you and I were talking about it for what NIH is trying to do, I guess my question to you is, are you willing to support something at an international level that includes these broad number of communities to try to get to those answers? I think yes. And that actually might be the right mechanism. Now that I'm seeing how the agriculture folks organized it, that might be the goal, is to try to pull together those entities that are in need of and hungry for help. And by pooling resources, can actually make some progress broadly. That might actually be a great mechanism.
I think one of the things that is a good thing to do is to socialize the idea with the stakeholders, those that, like, obviously you have I'm sure a group that are more important, because one of the things we feel is important is that it's not seen as RDA trying to capture it, but quite the opposite, that this is the right place for it to be done, because there could be other things going on. And there could be, so maybe there are other mechanisms, and it doesn't have to be an RDA, if you like, branded activity. I think in the case of what was and Cynthia's gone, but what I know helped, it was the fact that RDA was actually an independent forum was really valuable for the agricultural data, because there was the FAO and the GIAR, and and therefore it was nobody's space but everybody's space. And that was, so there are, pros and cons to it. But I think if you got the buy-in of the people, maybe with some of that small funding and what we can do with the Secretariat, we can help you to, move it on. I do believe they're quite exemplary, but as you saw, and she said, there are 3 of them. They're going to look for another co-chair. They have weekly meetings. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it's kind of has to be part of your day job.
Yep.
I think the funding is a no kidding important piece. Yeah. I think that's one of the reasons that the Earth and Space Sciences did so well, is the board back in 2015 or so, the board said data matters, and my position was approved. And they let me pretty much just run as fast as I could, and that was really incredibly valuable. And then now we have Chris, so now we have the relay team, which is great, because that means I could actually take a vacation day. I have to tell you, it's been really lovely. And Chris brought in other viewpoints. So he comes from the library background. He has very strong connections with astronomy, very strong connections with other entities, which has been incredibly valuable to us, so that we can see different viewpoints that we didn't have expertise in, but still, and very grounded in these international collaborations. RDA is critical. GoFair is critical. Leslie helps me understand how CODATA works. We know WDS is really critical. The Core Trust Seal certification matters. Collaborating across domains. Ian has been just, a great partner on those things where we overlap. Adawe and I have had multiple conversations along with his colleagues on, how is it working within NIH? How is it working within health? There's so many connections that matter. So RDA is critical for bringing us all together. And on that note, we're going to end the recording.